I wish I had when I was younger, something that I wished that someone would have provided for me when I was younger. And so when I saw that, I was like, this sounds really unique and different. And also, it wasn't just, a request for random assistance. It was very specific. It was like, you are a wheelchair user. We would like your insight as a wheelchair user. And I thought that that was really incredible that you were making sure that you were having accurate representation. So I was very excited to reach back out to help.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was like, oh, she responded. I'm so excited. So that Twitter account came in handy. And yeah, and I think what you just said was really powerful. I know we kind of had like our magical moment when, the reason I love this work is because I too, I have two sons, and I see my 3-year-old developing skills and beliefs and understandings of the world around him, and making sure I can see where the importance of having these words, regarding boundaries, regarding, social norms, gender norms, things like that are really important. And in the work I do, I recognize how that impacts even future behaviors, right? That can get a little scary. But I think when you said it, you were like, oh my gracious, you took it to a different level, right? Which is an experience I didn't have. You said it was kind of beyond just your body, but it, knowing that you could tell someone not to touch your wheelchair, right?
Yeah, nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever said you can tell people no. And so whenever I was out in public and someone would grab a piece of my mobility equipment to try to help me to push my wheelchair, or maybe they were holding onto it, or maybe if I was using a walker, they would try to push it in a certain direction. And I think people think that they are helping in most cases, or that they're being, friendly and familiar with you. But either way, it's pretty uncomfortable. And I always thought that I just had to sit there and accept that.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm so glad that we met, right? And everyone listening, I think, I hope will gain something from it, and we'll make sure we pass that on. And we're going to get more into that. So now that you kind of have an idea of what we're going to talk about today, let me, introduce the wonderful Emily. So Emily is a passionate disability rights activist, a writer, a speaker, and digital communications consultant. She is the editor-in-chief of the Rooted in Rights blog and co-hosts a podcast called The Accessible Stall, which is worth listening to. The one about gender, really interesting. Haven't finished it yet, but I recommend it. So we'll make sure that we send out the resources after this call. And let's see, she, in her first book, Demystifying Disability, is being published by 10 Speed Press, an imprint of Penguin Random House, June 2021. So look out for that. And you can also find more about her at wordsiwheelby.com, and we'll pop that into this chat. So just thank you so much, Emily, for being here. And just to get us started, obviously there's always the disclaimer, that we are speaking about our own experiences and the people that we are and how we see ourselves in the world. So Emily and I are going to get into a little bit of just some terminology, because I think we're doing this work that I'm in. I think I've learned a lot, and I want to make sure that we kind of do that as well. So Emily, do you want to start us off with that? Some terms, things that you have heard that you're like, oh, let me correct people on that, so we can all be more knowledgeable and inclusive.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think that language is deeply personal, and there's no right way to talk about disability. I want to be very clear about that. I do think that there are certainly some wrong ways, in the sense that you can use derogatory language, and we don't want to do that. But when it comes to preference for identity, I'm very flexible in how I talk about language. I used to be pretty militant, and I used to think that it was just my way and that was it. I use what's known as identity first language. So I'll call myself a disabled woman
Mm-hmm.
instead of person first language, which is a woman with a disability. And so for me, I used to think if you were calling me a person with a disability, you were not recognizing the fact that I actually count disability as part of my identity. It's not something that is with me, it is something that is part of who I am. And so when I say disabled person, I'm saying that in the same way that I would say Jewish person, in the same way that someone else might say Asian person or transgender person.
Mm.
It's just an identity to me. I don't mean just in a negative way. I mean just in the sense that it counts as part of me just as much as anything else does. And so for a while, my mindset was that if you were calling me anything other than a disabled person, then I wasn't okay with it. But
Mm.
now, I've really evolved to realize that language means different things to different people. It means different things in different cultures. And so, if you call yourself a person with a disability, if that's how you want to be identified, go for it. If you call yourself a disabled person, go for that too. If you say that you have special needs or you're differently abled or physically challenged, those are not my personal favorites. I try to avoid euphemisms whenever possible. Although I know, especially when you're talking about children, sometimes special needs comes into play a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
um, but as you get older, I feel like disability is especially the most straightforward way to talk about it. And
Yeah.
also, when you say special needs, that's not a protected class under any law, right? When you say a
Mm-hmm.
disabled person,
Yeah.
suddenly you have a protected class. So it helps to be specific whenever possible. I think it helps to avoid dancing around a lot of the euphemisms that we tend to use. But at the end of the day, it really is a personal choice. And I'm here to respect your personal choice if you respect mine. That's how I
Right.
look at it.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And then there's also, I had learned just from the saying, uses a wheelchair, right? Versus in a wheelchair. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, great question. So my I should clarify my biggest pet peeves
Yeah.
are confined to a wheelchair or
Mm.
wheelchair bound or bound
Okay.
to a wheelchair.
Okay.
Those have always driven me up a wall because I think of my wheelchair as my freedom. I think of it as freedom of movement, right?
Mm.
And when you're saying that I'm confined to it or bound to it, to me, that makes it sound like when I'm in it, I can't do anything. But it's quite the opposite. When I'm not in it, it becomes more challenging for me to do
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
And of course, I'm not in it right now. I'm sitting in a chair, but it's right next to me. It's always
Yes.
there. It's
Mhm.
always there. And to me, that doesn't mean that I'm bound to it. It means that it's the tool that gets me where I need to go. And
Right.
so, yeah, I definitely say wheelchair user when I'm trying to talk about my use of a wheelchair because that's exactly what I'm doing.
Right.
You know, is it true that I depend on it? Absolutely. Is it true that it's something I need? Absolutely. But am I literally bound and tied to it? In no way.
Right. Right. No, that's really helpful. And I think, can you talk a little bit about, I think you touched on that and you went into it a little bit about the relationship with your wheelchair in a way, because I think that leads into our boundaries discussion, right? Because I think when you and I talked about it, it was like, well, you know, you use it, it's a part of you, but it's your relationship with it, right? And so then if someone else touches it, like you said, that's like leaning on your shoulder. And I thought that was really helpful to understand.
Yeah. So I've been using my wheelchair since third grade.
Yeah.
I've been using some form of wheelchair since the third grade, and I'll be 30 next year. So I mean,
Woo-hoo.
it's been part of me for a while.
Yes.
Um, and I think a lot of people try to find ways to separate you from that and to
Hmm.
act as though they don't see your disability. And then
Right.
there's the flip side of that where I've literally been called the wheelchair, just
Oh
full
my
stop, the
gracious.
wheelchair, not even a person, just
Yeah.
a piece of equipment. And so
Mm.
there's rarely that happy medium where people recognize that I am a person, I'm sitting in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
And So, it's all over the map when it comes to how people react to the wheelchair. But
Right.
for me, it's always been an extension of my body because
Right.
in the same way that someone who does not have a disability would stand up and walk on their legs, I get around in the wheelchair. And so
Right.
it really is a part of me. And
Yeah.
when I'm sitting in it, I am very aware of it.
That's so
So
interesting.
I can tell if you have put your foot on it. I can kind of tell if you're touching it or if you've jostled it a little bit.
Mhm.
In the exact same way that if somebody was walking past you and they kind of bumped into you a little bit, you would
Right.
notice that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, you become very hyper aware
yeah.
of it because it's what I use every day.
Right, right. No, that makes so much sense. And even me just learning about, we were talking about, there's an image that we're using at the foundation that has a young girl who uses a wheelchair. And you really helped me learn about the world of it, right? Like, it was for a younger person, there's sometimes a pillow and a back pillow, and that it's more agile, right? It's not like the medical use one. And so it's its own world. But I think that's a really great point for people to recognize. If you tap it by accident, just as if you bumped into someone, that can warrant an apology in a way, right? um
Yeah, there's totally a flip side to that too, though, which is that even when I am at fault, people will also say they're sorry to me because I think
right,
they just don't quite know how to navigate around the
right,
wheelchair.
right,
So it's very funny to see sometimes people just aren't sure exactly what to say. I don't mean funny at their expense, just
yeah,
it happens. It's
it
an awkward
happens, yeah,
situation.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, if you bump or tap somebody, you usually say, "Oh, excuse me, sorry."
right.
But when it comes to the wheelchair, people seem to think that it's kind of just an object and they can do whatever they want most of
Right.
the time.
No, that's really helpful to understand. And is there anything that you want to share that just like again for knowledge that other people can help be an advocate or be aware of or a way to be helpful, and obviously every person, you can offer help, right? Like, can I get the door for you? Which I would do for, anyone that was behind me. And some people are like, no, and that's okay too. So if there's anything that you want to share in that regard, that might be helpful for us. And we recognize
Yeah.
it's one person's perspective.
Yeah, I really appreciate that caveat because I was about to give that as well. I think that etiquette becomes complicated because everybody has a different preference.
Yeah.
And for that matter, everybody has a different preference on a different day.
Right.
We're all human beings. And
Yeah.
so um, when people offer me help, I might react differently in a
Yeah.
given moment.
Just like
But
anybody else.
yeah, but there's a really key distinction here. It's that they're offering me help.
hmm
I think that goes back to the conversation of boundaries. A
Yeah.
lot of people just assume that they can kind of force their help upon me and I'm just supposed to accept it. So I think
Oh,
a very good
yeah.
example of that is when I put my jacket on, I have kind of a complicated system.
Yeah.
It works for me, but
Right.
I have limited extension in my arms. So when I'm putting my jacket on, whereas anyone else would just go zoop zoop and then it's on, right?
Right. Right.
For me, I flip it over my head and I wiggle into it, and it's a process. But I've been doing that process, for my whole life.
Right.
And
Right.
when someone is watching me do it, they're like, "Oh my God, she looks like she can't do this. I need to help her." And for me, it's normal. And
Right.
so when we see something and it looks like somebody needs help, the best thing you can do is say, "Do you need a hand with that?" And I'll tell you, "No, thank you. I got it." Or, "Yes,
Yeah.
I really appreciate it." But
Right.
don't come up to me and
Yeah.
start tugging on my jacket. That makes
Right.
me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. It would make me uncomfortable, right? And I would be like, what are you doing? That makes sense. That's helpful.
Yeah. So it's just a
Yeah.
matter of asking first.
Right. Right. And
It
I've
doesn't come down
learned,
to anything.
yeah, and I've even learned sometimes saying, "How can I help?" Right? Because there was it's obviously a different situation, but I had learned about I had taken like a course and with this person who was blind, and they taught us that you can offer to touch their elbow, And I thought that was really interesting. And then I was able to help somebody else, but I still asked. I said, like, how can I help you? And they were like, you can grab my elbow and kind of lead me, right? And so I think asking how, even like anyone else, like just because someone's holding a box, they might want you to open the door, they might want you to take the box. Like, you just want to ask that person, how can I be helpful too?
That's my favorite question.
Oh
When
yeah.
someone says not only, can I help you, but how can I help you? That's incredible. And interestingly, a friend of mine wrote a story about how one of her very good friends became one of her very good friends because he said, how can I help you do what you're already doing?
That,
And so that's
right,
that's it. It's not I'm going to take control of the situation and
right.
tell you what you, person with a disability, should be doing.
Yeah,
It's I know you've got this. How can I support that?
that's awesome. Yeah, I feel like we all need that,
Right,
right?
exactly. I mean, really, it's I think that we overthink etiquette in a lot of ways when
Yeah,
actually, if you stopped looking at anyone with a disability as being somehow fundamentally different than you as a human being, you would
yeah.
recognize that we actually all need to interact pretty similarly.
Right, right. No, that makes so much sense. And I think, so thank you for all this insight. And, getting into what we discussed, I think when we started our conversation originally, a while back, we talked about how, going back into boundaries and, I have the statistic here. It says the rate of serious violent crime, rape or sexual assault, robbery, and aggravated assault for persons with disabilities is more than 3 times the rate of persons without disabilities. And so I think right there, you and I started discussing how important it is, for individuals like yourself to, and every young person, to be able to learn this language, like you said, boundaries. And we do so much more, at our foundation within our curriculum to teach about all types of things that I'll go into that really help, not only they help lower the risk of that individual, but also helping to protect them, so they don't do harm, but also help lower the risk of having harm done to them as well.
There's a very strange dynamic where people with disabilities are generally viewed as completely asexual and untouchable, and these sort of fragile, delicate human beings who we don't consider with any kind of sexual lens. But
Mm,
then you have the flip side of that, which is that we are at 3 times higher risk
mm,
for things like sexual assault. And
yeah,
so it's a very strange dynamic because people treat us as though we're fragile and vulnerable, but they don't really recognize that that fragility and vulnerability can also apply to experiences of sexual assault. And it
right.
feels complex to talk about this because there's a lot to break down here.
Yeah,
um but I think that even I sometimes have, this false sense of security where I say, I'm in a wheelchair, nobody's going to touch me. But
right,
it's quite the opposite, statistically speaking.
right,
And so, yeah, society can't really figure out what to make of people with disabilities. On the one hand, we are, you know, delicate, untouchable creatures. On the other hand, we're sort of these freaks of nature, is how people think of us. And they can do to us what they please. It's this
right.
very complicated
That
dynamic.
is complicated. Yeah. And I think something that, I spoke to the director of our program, and we talked about, um, this relationship that we have with you has actually already helped us adjust the curriculum to be inclusive. There's one of the questions to check in with the kids, the students that take our curriculum. It's a thumbs up, thumbs down. And we're altering that, obviously, because that we recognize was not something that every person can do. And so that was right there one thing, that we made sure is going to be adjusted and available, depending on the children in the group. And then, you know homophobic bullying is actually, I'm going to seem far-fetched and I'm going to bring it back here, but so it's, it's a predictor of an individual that might cause later harm, right? Sexual violence. And basically it's about bullying over differences, right? And so in our curriculum we find that that's a really important piece to help children recognize and understand, you know the differences can include abilities, right? Or if someone has a walker or a wheelchair or is blind or, uses sign language, whatever it is, or has short hair, long hair, red hair, right? Children try to put people in categories and boxes. My son's starting to point out like, that's bigger, that's smaller, that's red, and he's calling everybody a he, but he knows some people are girls and boys and he's trying to figure it out, right? But having those conversations with kids to make sure that they can be inclusive and recognize that, people are people, and being understanding of that is really important.
The language of how we talk about it is super different when it's kids versus when it's adults. And I think
Yeah,
that, you know, the problem is that we don't give children a solid foundation to understand and talk about disability.
yeah,
And so it becomes this very confusing and scary concept. And I noticed that that really continues on into adulthood, where even adults are not sure how to act around me. And they pass that on to their children simply
right.
because they don't know what else to say. And
Yeah,
so for me, I'm constantly trying to, make myself as available to educate as I possibly can, but not everybody is receptive to that, and that's
mm-hmm.
because I think that there's a fear of difference, and that starts when kids are very little because
Right.
that's just what they're taught. And
Yeah.
so, if we don't kind of nip that in the bud early on, then I think that not that I'm a scientist here, but can certainly be um a predictor of how you're going to behave towards disabled people later on in life.
Right. That's such a great point. I mean, that's why, so we focus on the middle school age, and that's because they say, high school's like too late, right, for some things. And what we do is we help them learn attitudes and behaviors, right? It's like you're saying, but imagine this next generation, right? If they learn these things really early and they're exposed to it as well, right? Like I got to speak because when I was looking for the resource that I got to connect with you about, I had also had a friend of mine, her mom uses a wheelchair and has used one ever since she was little as well. um, but if children aren't exposed to people that are different from them, that's why this work is so important, right? So we can talk about it, help them understand what is out there, right? When you see someone who's different from you as a child, but like you said, even as an adult, there's that's an opportunity to have a new friend, but we have to teach them that early, which is really important.
Yeah, it's definitely twofold. It's a matter of educating children and making sure that they have an understanding of treating people like human beings. As you get older, it's about teaching people the nuances of, okay, this person looks different than you, talks differently than you, thinks differently than you, whatever the case may be.
Right.
But we still treat them with respect. They still deserve to have the same boundaries in place as anybody else.
Such a great point. It's empathy, right? Empathy is a huge thing that we're working on. And, we can't always put ourselves in someone else's shoes, but we can, it's important to understand that, and empathy can conquer quite a lot, right? And so I think that's an important skill that we also work on, and being mindful, like you said. So I think that's a really great point. I wanted to know if you would share some of the experiences that you had kind of around boundaries, because I think it does two things. I think it helps people be aware, because you had mentioned like one of your teachers, and there might be something else in there, which, like you said, I mean, the intent isn't there, but that doesn't mean that it's not a trigger, right? I'm very aware of that, and so I think people can be mindful. But then we're talking about, there might be parents on this call, or people of all sorts that can be aware, and we can make for a better generation and a better, even not just for the next kids, but like us as adults, things that we can learn anything at any age, right? We can course correct and make a difference tomorrow, today, in the next hour.
I totally agree. And I have two examples. One of them is the one that you were alluding to, where I had a teacher, actually, I had multiple teachers who did this, but one in particular. In school, I would park my wheelchair next to my desk, and then I would get out and I would sit in the desk because I needed the writing surface. And so I had a teacher who would, in the middle of his lectures, walk over to my wheelchair and lean on it, just like casually, all casually, and, have conversations with the class from that point.
Yeah.
And it was honestly kind of mortifying to me, and
Yeah.
I'm not really sure that anybody else was thinking about it. I mean, goodness knows what's going on in the minds of high schoolers, right? But to me, it felt like it was really unnecessarily calling attention to the wheelchair. And it's not that I'm
Mhm.
ashamed of the wheelchair, it's just that that should not be an armrest or a focal point while you're giving a talk to students. I just felt very uncomfortable with the idea that it wasn't seen as my mobility, it was seen as someone's armrest.
Mm.
And so that was really frustrating to me.
Did you ever say something to that teacher?
You know, I feel like I might have,
Okay.
but I honestly can't remember. And also, just in general, when you feel uncomfortable and you don't have the right language to speak up and you
Mm.
feel disempowered. I mean, that's really
Yeah.
the crux of this conversation.
Yeah, right.
But then, and this is on a more serious note than that even. When I was in ninth grade, I remember I was in our high school production of, I think it was Bye Bye Birdie.
Oh, yeah.
And
I was in Bye Bye Birdie too once. Go
okay.
you.
um and I will never forget, I had a crush on one of the older kids who was playing one of the leads, and he was a bit of a weird one in some ways, but I think he knew, like, oh, this younger girl has a crush on me, let me mess with her.
Mm.
But it definitely went a little too far, or a lot too far, because we had been, and I suppose I should put a trigger warning on this one. We were backstage in the like a dress rehearsal or something, and it was completely dark, we were both waiting to go on, and he just decided that that was the time to corner me and give me a lap dance because he thought it was funny.
Mm.
And it was not funny, it was mortifying. I told him to stop, I told him I was very uncomfortable. He kept going.
Mm.
Horrifying.
I'm
you
so
know
sorry.
and then I had to just go on stage like nothing happened. And I went to talk to the teacher, and afterwards, and she started laughing, because how funny is it that, oh, I'm sitting down, so I'm just in a perfect spot for a lap dance, and ha ha ha, he didn't mean anything.
Mm.
And I have lists of examples like this, but
I
I bring
can't
this one
imagine.
up because I wanted to point out that sometimes when you do try to tell somebody what happened and you try to articulate that it made you uncomfortable, people aren't going to take you seriously. And that's
Yeah.
especially true for younger kids. Sometimes I think that there's this assumption that, like, oh, no one meant anything by it, they're too young, like they're just being silly. But no, we
Right.
were in high school. That was really inappropriate and really upsetting,
Yeah.
to like trap me in a dark corner
Right.
and violate
Trap.
personal space.
That's unbelievable. First of all, thank you for sharing that, because I think it'll really give people some insight. And I think, first of all, that situation for you, because you like you said, you use a wheelchair, and then what he did was inappropriate, trapping anybody in a corner of any sort, right, in a dark place. You said no, and so there's so many levels of that. And I think what you've just brought to light is a handful of things that I know that we work on at the Aaron Levitas Foundation. So thank you for bringing it up. And I think I'm just seeing there's so many things that keep kind of oozing up, right? So right there, I have a little list, right? So like, first of all, that he thought that was okay, right? You said no, it didn't stop. There was not respect there. I don't know, was anyone around you that was also watching?
I think there might have been a couple other
Right.
people backstage, but it was pitch black. You
Pitch
know how
black.
it is
So
back
scary. So scary in
there.
any situation, right? And I think, knowing that that's where education does come in and it is important, right? So like mistakes are going to get made and we recognize that. First of all, high school, we'll talk about a statistic there versus middle school. But like you said, he's just playing or whatever it is, that's part of the problem, right? When people say, whether it's she likes you, that's why she's doing that, or he's just being a boy, none of that is okay language anymore, and it's because it perpetuates these problems, right? So things start at the low level, and that's why we need to focus on it at that point, and we need to stop it early. And we use restorative practices, which would, let's talk about that situation, right? What would have happened if you were part of our work is you two would have been brought together, if you were comfortable, as well as other people eventually, and talked about what happened. But before that, you would have had education around it, right? Like he would have been aware that you listen to people's words and body, and the teacher should have been being more supportive of what was going on. And that's another thing, teachers have so much on their plates, but right now trying to recognize what's sexual harassment, what's sexual assault, what's not okay. And the fact that the teacher laughed, I'm so sorry to hear that. I can't imagine the loneliness in a way, right? Like that you're alone in this uncomfortable feeling and having to see that person again. And then there's the fear. It's almost like PTSD. Like, is this going to happen again? Because someone else saw it. And that is why we use restorative practices, because situations come up, right? Which we don't think about, like old school, right? I did something to you, right? Then we both go to the principal's office. We talk it out. You might kind of be forced to say like, I'm okay, because like what else is going to happen? But in the work that we do, anyone else that was a part of that situation, and sometimes even a community member, if it's going to help, like a parent, if it was necessary, those bystanders are so important, because one of them might have walked away and said, oh, I can do the same thing he did. Or someone else might be like, oh my gosh, is someone else going to corner me like Emily was cornered, right? So there's a lot of emotions that happen in that situation that our work recognizes and makes sure everyone out of that situation learns from it. And it's important that you walk away understanding, breaking down, like, why did he do that? And then he can come out of it saying like, he thought it was funny. And so that whether it was or wasn't a direct attack on you, so you don't have to walk around with that fear, or that he then says, I'm sorry, but really recognizing that what were the issues there.
Yeah, I mean, I do wish that it had been handled somehow,
Yeah.
because it wasn't handled. That was exactly the thing. I think that because there was the added element of my wheelchair, because there was the assumption that kids will be kids, because there's just so much on teachers' plates that they don't seem to always take everything as seriously
Yeah.
as you might hope.
Right.
There's a lot of dynamics at play. And
Yeah.
so for me, something that quite honestly continues to be a rather traumatic experience is something that I don't think anybody else is even giving a second thought to.
Right.
Every time I tell people that it happened to me now, they're like, oh my gosh, like that's horrible. I can't believe that happened to you. But in the moment, I seem to be the only one who thought it was a problem. And, to make matters worse, there's this sort of air that certain people have of knowing that they can get away with something. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what happens if we don't stop it right away and do, what you were talking about, where we address and get to the root of the problem
Right.
before it becomes a bigger problem.
Right.
Because, unfortunately, the person who did this to me knew that they did something that made me uncomfortable. acted quite self-satisfied about it. And I will never forget, we went on stage right after that, and he made very awkward eye contact with me
Mm,
during some of the, moments on stage. And
yeah.
I'm like a little freshman. I'm an ensemble member, he's a lead.
Yeah.
And the in high school, those dynamics are very real.
Yes.
And it's a power situation.
Right.
You know, and I was told that I'm at the bottom.
Right. No, and nothing is okay about that. And that, that's what we're hoping to change. That's what our work does. So I can't thank you enough for sharing that, but I think it really opens up people's minds that that experience wasn't okay for anybody. And what's really interesting is to find, I am not saying anything that he has done is okay, but what we're finding in our work is sometimes, what's behind that, right? Like, so you have this experience and he was wrong in what he did. But other things also that happen, sometimes it's because they saw it somewhere, right? Like, I mean, he's in high school. So let me share the statistics. So sexual harassment is at its highest in middle school. Nearly 50% of middle school students report experiencing sexual harassment. Then sexual harassment does go down in high school. And that is when, unfortunately, rape and assault goes up. And so that is why we focus on the middle school age when they are at the sexual harassment level. And that's where we can make the change, right? They're learning. And it's not just about, sex. And we don't, not rape, it's not these scary things. It's those behaviors and attitudes like we were talking about way before, right? Like, gender norms and having empathy and listening to your peers and bystander intervention, right? Like these are the things that are in our curriculum for a reason. And, someone mentioned on the side something about, what education are teachers getting? And so, our goal is to have this curriculum. We're in pilot program stages right now, and we're really getting it to the next level. We're ready to expand, always looking for the good funding so we can just really get it out there, but we're so excited about it. And Emily is helping us with a special tool that will be for parents and kids together. And then our program also is going to have one free of charge for parents, talking about some of these things. So they, especially right now with COVID, right? Like parents are educators, we're so many things. And I think what you said is important. Teachers have a lot on their plate, but it is important that the schools do give them the skills to identify what's going on, because we are finding that some teachers are partaking, like, for example, what you've just went through, in things like sexual harassment, even with sexting. Some teachers aren't always able to identify, sometimes it's child pornography, right? Like a younger person engaging in a certain level of texting, that's not okay. And it's important that we, if a parent doesn't know it, that's important that we all know it together. Teachers, parents, administration, this stuff is here and it's coming.
I love that you brought that up, because I think that we're in this virtual world now, and we forget that the virtual world has existed for quite some time, and that sexual harassment is equally problematic in that world. And that for that matter, it's something that continues to happen. That certainly doesn't go away. I feel like it gets worse the older that you get
Yeah.
when it comes to online sexual harassment. And for me, when I was in the online dating world, this was several years ago, the amount of comments that I would be subjected to related to my wheelchair, and just the
Mm.
very inappropriate things. And there were a couple of people who treated me as though my vulnerability was really a turn on to them.
Mm.
So, you know, it follows you, is what I'm.
Yes.
This is something that continues to escalate. People
Yeah.
continue to hold on to these attitudes.
Right.
Continue to be seen as, if you have a disability, you are this vulnerable target.
Right.
And so we forget that. I think, like I was saying before, if we don't stop this early, it's just going to spiral. And I feel like
Right.
we've seen every possible iteration of this.
You're right. Yeah. And one of our one of the pieces of our curriculum is called safe use of social media and technology. And you're right, because it gives people a barrier, right? They can kind of berate someone. One of the scenarios we go over that we had a child actually kind of have an aha moment was that um, they were texting someone kind of over and over again while they weren't using an example like you said, but they were kind of doing it a lot and almost at the harassment level. And the child was like, well, I had access, right? Like they gave me their number. So they wanted that, right? But that child, they're children. But that, if we didn't have that experience and that opportunity to talk to this kid about that, imagine what that would have turned into later, right? Like that could be the person who did that to you. And so this child, then we worked with them and had that aha moment like, oh, she said, please stop texting me, in this scenario that we gave the children. And he realized that that is not something that's okay. When someone says, please stop, they mean it. And it's something that you need to respect. And if you want to try again in a different way and talk to them and respect them, that's part of it. But like you said, the internet is a crazy world. That's why in our work we're actually looking to endow our program, because it needs to continue, right? The world is changing. We have internet, they can talk through Xbox, right? There's so many ways for this, to communicate and get bullied, like you said, right? Like that they're open to get it in, and they're, also able to put it out. And it's really important that we have this next group of people, and we're all going to learn from it too, right? But if we're going to really make change, we got to start at this young age, so the next generation.
Yeah, and this generation, right, is growing up with all of this technology so readily available
Yeah.
that it's second nature to them. I think I'm probably at this point the last generation that can recall growing up without, a cell phone in my hand
Right, right,
or anything. I didn't get my first cell phone until I was in high school.
right.
Um, and so it was still a new world, I think.
Yeah.
Teachers were figuring out how to handle it, but now there's this immediacy with technology, and you can say things before you have a chance to think them through. And
Right.
this is a pattern that I see happening, and I can absolutely, to be quite honest, imagine some of the people that I talk to, back in the online dating world, being those exact kind of kids who were like tugging hair on the playground. And
Right,
then
right.
there's that mindset of like, oh, they wanted it, they liked it, this is just how we flirt. No,
You're
I didn't
right.
want it, I didn't like it, I don't want to flirt with you, you know um
Yeah.
but how do we say that? And so if somebody had sat me down at a young age and said, you can actually say no, and there will be consequences if that no is not listened to, and not the kind of consequences where I want someone to get in trouble and go to the principal's office, but consequences in the sense that like your actions mean that there's going to be follow up.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And that's exactly what we're working to do, at the foundation and in this world, and starting young. But like I said, we're all learning along the way, because like you said, we have heard those lines, he's just doing it because he likes you, or she's doing it because she likes you, or, they're, boys will be boys, that kind of thing. And there's a lot to learn and grow. And I think, why our work is research based, and we look forward to having it be evidence based, it can really make some change. And you're a huge part of that. So, I know that, you've really helped open up, this conversation. And I know everyone has learned so much from you, but we also look forward to having it inform the work that we do, with this young group of people, but then everyone else involved, right? Like, we need a whole overhaul here. And it's kind of like you said, you've been living with it, but I think people are starting to see it. Some people still don't. But once you learn about it, you can't look away, right? You're just like, this has got to change. And that's what we're all a part of. And we're just so appreciative to have you as part of this team, because we couldn't do it without you.
I've been loving this, honestly. And also, I'm a very big believer in ripple effects and in changing one person's mind and one person's attitudes and actions at a time. And I think
Hmm.
that if we can reach one person who reaches another person who reaches another person, then that's how we're gonna make this kind of change. And
Yeah.
I know that as much as I keep saying I wish I could go back and I wish that I could have had this, the best thing for me is knowing that even if I did not have this in my life, that generations moving forward are going to.
Yes. Yes.
I don't want children to have to feel the way that I felt in these particular moments. And if we can work on preventing that, and if we can really work on humanizing, how we talk about situations like this,
Right.
I think that's an immense step forward.
It is. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously our work is, focused in sexual assault, but there's just like kind of the ripple effect concept there too, right? It is relevant to so many other things. So, bullying and, like you said, like thinking about the workforce, right? If you have people that know how to have conversations and respect people's space and their words, just imagine, what that world looks like, dating later, right? Teen dating violence, it really impacts them if we can change and help create better attitudes and behaviors for this younger generation. I'm seeing some comments really quick. What I'm going to do is first, I just want to quickly talk about, give a very brief explanation of the Aaron Levitas Foundation. We started in 2017, and we aim to prevent sexual assault with education for youth and also help survivors heal. And so we got connected with Emily through our great work, and she's an incredible advocate, and we're really happy to have her. That's because we're working together on a project for both parents and children around kind of the early risk factors and terminology that kids can learn around sexual assault and sexual abuse prevention. So I'm going to open the floor up. Emily, is there anything else you wanted to say before there's any open questions that we might be able to take before it's 11 o'clock?
Honestly, just to thank you for incorporating this perspective into the conversation because it is still widely missing from the discussions. Disability is still on the margins of marginalization. So the fact that you are doing work to make sure that it's brought equally to the forefront is really exciting to me.
Great. Well, thank you. And yeah, like you said, ripple effect. Let's make it happen. So, Debbie, is there any specific questions that you see that we can answer or help with?
If not, I will say that I'm always available as a
Yeah.
resource. I'm always happy to talk about these things if questions come up after the fact.
For sure. I see something about the curriculum. Yeah, and that's same for me. We'll email everybody. You'll get contact information for Emily and myself about our curriculum and Emily's great work. All right. I think I'm just trying to look through some of the comments, but I think we're probably good there.
Yeah, those
Um,
are really great questions.
any other questions? I see it moving. Okay. Thank you, Marilyn. We look forward to hearing from you.
Oh, I see Debbie asked a question about how we can assist teachers now.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So, we are developing a teacher piece of our curriculum. What we have found within the sexual assault prevention information in schools is we've gotten some really great feedback from the school that we're currently working with. COVID kind of stopped us. We were going to have another partner school sooner, but hopefully we'll get to have another partner school soon. And the teacher piece, we have the parent piece and the teacher piece. And why that's really important is we're finding there are some gaps, right, in this education. It might be, a crumpled up piece of paper that goes home in a backpack with a parent, and we're gonna take that to the next level, and we're actually gonna offer it even if the parents aren't in working with our curriculum. So that's extremely exciting as a project. And then the teacher piece is also something else we're developing, so teachers are informed, like like Emily had said, what are signs of sexual harassment, but also the work that we do so they can be fully aware of helping those situations. And then we also are working on our Train the Trainer program. So that will allow our work to extend past, one school, 60 kids, right? It will be able to allow a whole school to take it on with just support from our staff, which is really exciting to know about. And so all those pieces are happening. Let me see. Yes, we will share this piece on Facebook. So we're going to pop it up there probably in the next couple of days. So you can look out for that. Keep an eye out. And I can make sure to send each of you who listened today a link to the call. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me, Marissa.
Of course. Thank you, Emily. Check out our podcast. It's great. We'll put all the information on Facebook for you.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.